Hi, Annabel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. It's so great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you, and I wanted to do this for a long time, and now was the perfect, perfect week and synchronicity, I think, right now in the midst of everything that's going on to talk with you. And I just would love to hear from you if you have a daily practice that is important to you to stay grounded or just to connect with yourself, and if you want to share it with the listener.
Yes, I think the most important thing for me is to get out on the land every day. So I have 3 dogs, and one of them is a big wolf. So I walk them every day for an hour on the land. And the land where I walk is between here, the Avalon Rose Chapel, and the Michael ley line literally runs straight through this room. I'm literally sitting on it. And then on the other side of the fields behind the house is the Mary ley line. And they meet at Borough Mump, which is this incredible ancient mump that the Michael ley line runs to after it's run through Glastonbury tour. And the Michael Mary ley lines meet in the Sacred Marriage at the top of Borough Mump. So I literally sort of walk in this triangle of fields that's created by the Michael Mary ley lines. So it feels like I'm walking within the land of the Sacred Marriage every day with my dogs. And that for me is vital, because that's how I truly connect to soul, to source, to spirit, and to the land and to the energies of Avalon.
That is just so beautiful. And I've been to Avalon or Glastonbury, and I really felt those, that energetic force field, and it's so powerful. It was actually really keeping me up all night over there. I was like waking up, and it's so beautiful. And I'm sure you will share more about this in a bit. I think like just knowing about this place and knowing what potential there is, it can be really beautiful for people to hear. And I would want to start to, for those that maybe haven't connected with you yet, haven't seen your Instagram, maybe you want to share who you are and what you're doing in the world right now.
Okay, so I'm Annabel Boulay, and I'm the founder of the Avalon Rose Chapel here in Glastonbury and Avalon in the Summerlands. And I have over 30 years experience now, both academically and experientially, in women's spirituality, women's empowerment. Both as an academic, I did my master's and PhD, really studying goddess paganism, and then gnosticism, and then what the patriarchal church did as they manipulated and distorted the original teachings. And then what I specialize in is peeling back the layers of those patriarchal distortions so that we can arrive and explore those original teachings and use them for the healing and empowerment of women. So that's really my soul mission, is to restore those original teachings and spiritual tradition of our ancestors, so that women especially can connect with that ancestral lineage and those teachings that are so empowering for the feminine. Yeah.
Such important work. And it's amazing that you've, like the work that you've done both academically and then also practically in your own life. What brought you into even the topic? Like what in your life drew you to even study it and start practicing what you're doing right now?
So when I was 19, I was on a beach in Thailand on my gap year, and that's where I read all the Greek myths for the first time in preparation for my English degree. So that was sort of the beginning. And then during that first BA degree, that's when I really discovered my feminism. And even sort of studying the medieval mystics and the politics and the patriarchy at that time in the medieval period. And then that just really developed. And then I remember calling my father one day and this was age 19, and just saying, why is God male? And we always have these incredible philosophical discussions, and he just wasn't expecting that question. And that really was the beginning of my path of exploring that question. And it did just lead me onto this 30-year quest, really, of diving into lots of different cultures. So I was then very blessed to spend 4 summers living in southern Italy. And that's where I became fascinated by this interplay between paganism and Catholicism. So in this Italian family that I lived with, the mama, would slit the chicken's throat and offer the blood to the earth with a prayer to the Madonna. So this incredible, very ancient traditional way of life that was truly gnostic in its combination of the pagan and the Catholic. So that was my initiation onto the path of the Black Madonna in southern Italy. And then I went to Peru, and I was volunteering with street children and orphans out there. And I was living in the house of a shaman, and then I traveled with him throughout Peru and spent some time with one of the last indigenous tribes in the Amazon. And that was really my initiation onto my more of a shamanic path. And then I came back to London and went back to university to do my master's and PhD, and began to deeply study this subject and really exploring and comparing what's known as goddess theology with feminist theology. And then I gave birth to my daughter, who I knew I needed to call Sophia, but at the time I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. So although I had studied the goddess Sophia a bit in my master's, I really had no embodied experience of her and her mythos. And she was about to initiate me in an extreme level. So my eldest daughter, Sophia, was born with a life-threatening syndrome and had life-saving surgery at birth. And then over the course of the next years, I had to nurse her through 12 more operations. So she came in as this incredible soul and teacher for me. And she led me repeatedly on the Sophianic descent and ascent of the soul, which of course is the later Gnostic version of the original ancient Mesopotamian myth of the descent of Inanna Ishtar, which in turn is inspired by the movement of the planet of Venus. So that was where I had this embodied experience of the mythos, and we actually literally came to embody that myth. And during that time, I was training as a priestess of Avalon with the Glastonbury Goddess Temple and continuing to study. And I began to write my novel, The Serpent's Tale, which is set in the village I lived in Italy in the 16th century, at the time of the witch burnings. And so I channeled all my postgraduate research into this book, which explores a rural village's fight to save the wise woman from the fires. But it's also a deeply allegorical book. So really it explores the myth of Sophia and the myth of Demeter and Persephone, which the myth of Sophia is based upon. And then in 2009, I published The Serpent's Tale and was finally able to move down to the Holy Isle of Avalon, Glastonbury, where I'd been coming for, I think, 12 years by that point, probably. And I was 6 months pregnant with my son. And I gave this talk at the launch of my book, to hundreds of people. And I said how, I'd learnt this amazing sort of philosophy of life from Sophia and from the myth of Sophia, and that it's in the darkest times of our lives and those deep shadow experiences that we all go through, that we find her light of wisdom. And it is she who rebirths us back into wholeness and back into a greater depth of love and compassion and strength and courage and wisdom. But it was as if I had thrown down a gauntlet to life. And anyone who's spent much time in Avalon, which is known as the Isle of the Dead, transformation and rebirth, will know that there is a part of her that will annihilate you and annihilate your ego to strip you back to ashes so that you can rebuild yourself back up. And that's exactly what she did. So 3 months later, I gave birth to my son, and he was born with an even rarer life-threatening syndrome. So he was born unable to breathe, feed, speak, or smile. So I was taken to an even greater depth of shadow experience through that. And for many months, I was resuscitating him under emergency conditions several times a day. So that's when she really stripped me bare. And for that first year, I ran on adrenaline, focusing on just keeping him alive. And then when his airway stabilized somewhat, that is when my rage, my holy rage of injustice came. And I had about an 18-month period where I could not feel compassion. And that was so hard because I had been working in mental health for years and working with survivors of severe and enduring mental health difficulties. So needing to have a vast amounts of compassion. So it was very challenging to suddenly feel this rage and this lack of compassion. So I began to work with the fire, and my blood. So every month for 9 months, for literal pregnancy gestation, each moon I worked with my moon blood and with the fire, and I painted the Healing Room art installation. So I painted 4 very big paintings of the Mother of Loss, the Mother of Solitude, the Mother of Healing, and the Mother of Compassion. And I literally painted my way through my grief, through my intense sense of loneliness that happens whenever we are each experiencing that shadow place. And then I painted my way through the healing with Bridget and back to the ability to feel compassion for others. And then I was able to come back to that place of empowerment, of deep, intense gratitude for actually what our family had been through. I mean, it took a long time to get to that point, but it is such a blessing to now be in a place of deep gratitude, of the reaping of the harvest gifts from that experience. And that really was the birthing. So 19 years after Sophia was born and 9 years after Zach was born, I founded the Avalon Rose Chapel on Beltane. And it felt like that was, the light, her light at the end of all that trauma that we had all been through, was the foundation for the birthing of a sacred container through which to share not only the teachings in that kind of left brain academic way, but actually to share our path of gnosis, the wisdom that we've gained through the privilege of walking with her in those depths and then also in the light. And so that's where I find myself now, is, in that place of deep gratitude for it all, and just really committed to sharing that, for the good of all. If sharing that knowledge and that gnosis can help inspire anyone else, then that's really what my mission is.
What a powerful journey, and so deeply transformational. And thank you so much for sharing it. And it's just that it feels like what you shared and said also, like this going into this real descent in life is very much initiating you into something. And also you find a deeper sense of, like, you have to start trusting a little bit more and start to surrender much more when you go through that. It's like not a test, but it does really test you in so many ways, and that can bring you so much closer to that truth and this connection that maybe we have forgotten. But it's so beautiful how, and also I'm thinking about this connection with your embodied, like the goddess in so many ways, in your pregnancy and in your birth, and then it's like, yeah, it's so powerful, your whole story and everything that you've done but also experienced. I think that's really important to hear and to understand, and to see in a priestess like you, that you have this like real life experience, and that you can share from an authentic place. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's really beautiful, and that it led to you creating the temple. And so what is the practice in your temple? And I'm also really curious, because I've been tapping into the stories around the gnosticism and Sophia. It was maybe last summer. Yeah, we connected last summer. And last summer also I saw some type of short documentary about about the stories around Sophia, and it was so beautiful. Can't remember which one it was, but I will look it up. But what is the story of Sophia? Maybe everyone doesn't know Goddess Sophia or the creation story around that. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that?
Yes, so the Gnostic myth of Sophia, which is the much later version of the descent of Inanna and Ishtar. And in my priestess training, I track it the whole way down through the millennia. But it arrives basically in Gnostic Christianity with the myth of Sophia. So Sophia begins as the soul in what's known as the pleroma, which other people might say is heaven or the interlife, with Yeshua, with Christ. And she descends. And so this is the point where we basically prick our finger on the spinning wheel of life and we incarnate, we choose to incarnate. So it's a descent onto earth and into this incarnation, into this earth walk. And then she is described often in a way that women are as whores, or, you know, as destitute. But really, that's a metaphor for our egoic journey through suffering and through the trials of life. And her whole purpose is to return to Christ, to the pleroma, which of course is our own journey. So our soul's journey is to incarnate, and then it's to go on our soul's path of both the suffering and the light and the shadow, but always with the intention of growing as a soul, as evolving. And then it is our our path to return back to source, and what I call back to the divine magical child self, who is still dwelling in the pleroma or the Garden of Eden or heaven. And then we return, as Sophia returns back, she's united in the sacred marriage with Christ. And so this is one of the most powerful and ancient myths of the path of the rose, is the sacred marriage. And it's through this sacred marriage, between our own inner king and queen, bride and sacred bridegroom, but also we experience that being mirrored externally in our relationships as well. And then it's through that sacred marriage that we give birth to this divine magical child aspect of us once more in our ever evolving soul spiral of life, and then are born yet again into another incarnation. So that's the myth of Sophia. So she represents that on the reincarnation level, but then also, of course, that's a metaphor for the individual level of the descent into the shadow and the rebirth and the return, which is this constant spiral that we do throughout life as our soul grows. And so I think you're absolutely right. You know, I love that you touched on those two words, trust and surrender, because those are her teachings, that I remember at a point, and I'm sure everyone can, this will resonate with everyone, that point of challenge of being so deep in the shadow that I was raging at her, like, how could you do this to me again? How could you put me through this again? How could you inflict more suffering on my children? And I swore I'd never serve her as a priestess anymore. But it was within that depth that I felt her as that dark mother holding me. And that's when I realized that it wasn't her who was inflicting this on me. It was her who was carrying me. Yeah. And so, yeah, for me, she symbolizes, you know, the path of our soul and that redemption that is to be had through the return to source and the return to the sacred marriage of our soul. Yeah.
That is, I mean, that was so powerful to when you realized that she was holding you, and yeah, that whole aspect of the dark goddess and the dark mother, it's really, it is like the feminine. It is our, like, how our body works, and the blood that we like, everything about our bodies are in that space, right? The womb and everything, but still we like forget that aspect and think that it's scary or like something bad, because it's the same with all of these, like what we talked about before, Ishtar and that whole journey. And then I saw that you also the Lilith mysteries as well, and it's so beautiful because it's something that really is necessary to tap into, to really do deep work and to really work with healing, and maybe everyone isn't called to work with that aspect, of course, but this other, you know, because it's interesting what you said also, like how when you look at history, how the feminine was changed and shaped by the patriarchal system, and how it looked before, and the aspects of the goddess that has been suppressed, like the also the rage and the all of these things that is also natural to feel and that has to be expressed. So it's so important that it becomes more inclusive. And I think depending on where we are, which phase we are in our lives, we can really use that. But I think also that sometimes when we are, it's very clear on our journey, like if we're supposed to work with that energy, it becomes extremely clear, right, with the experiences we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought Lilith in, because she is absolutely that archetypal energy of the holy rage. And I actually painted her as the mother of solitude in my Healing Womb art installation, because I think that's something that's very important about our shadow experiences, is that sense of utter aloneness that we experience. And it doesn't matter how many people are loving us and supporting us, there is a deep aloneness in our suffering. And she came through so powerfully for me as a guide in that place of the utter wilderness of that shadow experience. And she became my guide through that holy rage that I was feeling. And once you can access the grief that is, of course, beneath the rage, then she can help you to transform it into the most incredible resource of power. And that is where I experience Lilith's power. And I know a lot of feminists use Lilith, you know, as this very strong role model because she refused to lie beneath Adam. And but she is that force within us that is able to survive challenges alone to an extent that we never dreamt possible. You know, like I remember back in my early 20s, and I was, suicidally depressed, and I was an addict, and I was incredibly codependent. I didn't believe I could really cope with anything at that stage in my life. And now to be in this place of empowerment has only come from being completely stripped bare. So the empowerment comes from a place of deep humility, where you have literally been stripped back to ashes, and ground down, and you have to mythically, archetypally remember your body, literally put your body back together, and then stand in your power, not from an egoic place of wanting to have power over, like the patriarchy, but from a soul place where you know what it is to be stripped back to nothing, and to use those gifts to help others to remember themselves. And Lilith, for me, is about that journey of being stripped raw and then finding our power in that place of utter annihilation. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very true. I can definitely relate to that in so many ways, and it's something that we can't really suppress either, like when that journey starts. So we really, and it is a practice again of trust and surrender, and daring to go into that dark place with her, and still feeling like what you felt, like still embraced. It's not punishment or anything like that. So it's really beautiful. And yeah, I love that. And there's so much to tap into that space to the whole Lilith. I think that could be a whole conversation in itself, because there's so much symbolism and so much history there. And I'm also curious, like with the temple that you have in Glastonbury, I'm always curious because I've had conversations with different women about the rose and the symbols, because we all work with it in different ways. Like what is your experience with that, and for the temple as well, the rose and that lineage?
So when I founded the Avalon Rose Chapel, I actually found it originally as the Glastonbury Gnostic Chapel. And it's really the first chapel in Glastonbury to be dedicated to this Gnostic path that is so woven into the mythos and the land and the history of Glastonbury in the Isle of Avalon. So as a Gnostic, I believe that Joseph of Arimathea brought Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail Sarah here to Avalon, and that their followers built the very first chapel, which was dedicated to the Magdalene. And it was its foundations were found beneath the Abbey, Glastonbury Abbey. And so when I founded the chapel, it was as close as physically possible to this original chapel. And we had 2 years there. And that 2 years felt like the period in time which I needed to anchor and root the energies of the chapel right there, sort of where that first chapel was built. And then I actually closed those premises during the pandemic last summer. And I was, like so many of us in the pandemic, in that place of the hangman, of just the surrender, and waiting to see what she wanted me to do and where the chapel was meant to be. And then through these incredible series of synchronicities, I was very blessed to buy an old chapel, which is situated on what's known as the Isle of the Dog, which in the Glastonbury zodiac, there are 12 astrological signs on the actual Holy Isle of Avalon of Glastonbury. And then there's one 13th sign that's on one of the islands in the Great Lake of Avalon surrounding. And so I live on the Isle of the Dog, literally beneath the dog star Sirius. And so much of my teachings are around working with Sirius. And so I now have this incredible blessing to actually live in the chapel, and I literally sleep on the Michael ley line, and it runs through this room as well. And then I'm just at the moment developing new premises back in Glastonbury to just anchor the energies there as well. So I now have what I feel is like this sacred container here for all my work, and it really is a portal to Sirius. And I have my 3 dogs guarding it here with me. So I do all my online work from here, from this sacred portal here. And then I will now have a new premises to just anchor those energies as a sanctuary in Glastonbury as well for visitors.
Wow, that is so beautiful and so good to be in that. There's something magical when you come out to the countryside in that part of England. It's really, I mean, it's so beautiful and it's so powerful in many ways. Just like the heart chakra is like really open when you're moving through. It feels like the heart chakra. So it's really nice and healing. And as you said, it can also be like when you come to a place like that, it can also like provoke you, and it can be like it can start to make you feel. And I think that so many people also practice there. And you mentioned the Abbey. I really love the Abbey, and so much intention and everything that's happening around there, and this goddess consciousness that's awakened. So it's like really a power place. So I would love to visit. And lastly, something that's really connected to everything that we spoke about up until now is Venus. And I know that because I always get your beautiful newsletters, and you speak about the gates. And last summer, everything happened last summer when we connected. It feels like everything started to, but I started also to study the Venus star points, but the gates is something also that I haven't. I've read your beautiful text about it. Maybe you can like shed some light on that, because it's so connected with everything. I mean, Venus is also that aspect of the goddess. So
yes, yeah. So I've had such a fascinating path with Venus. She, again, it's like we were talking about earlier before we started the recording, is that, you know, these deities and these energies, they come in and they initiate us. And that's when you know it's like truly authentic. It's not us going and chasing them, it's them coming in. And so she initiated me a long time ago, actually on Mount Sinai, which for me is like the cradle of the Rose lineage and my soul's home. And I was in a cave up at the top of Mount Sinai with my Bedouin guides, and I'd had this incredible transmission. And my guides just said so clearly to me, the secret is in the rose. And at the time, I didn't really consciously like really get it. And then various synchronistic things happened, and I was led to various books, and I received various downloads and transmissions, and that's when Venus really started like showing me what she wanted me to work with. So in January 2019, I launched my Rosemary membership, where we track the Venus cycle. And I especially work with Venus and Sirius. So in the Rose lineage mythos, Sirius is Casista. He's the holy bridegroom of Venus, who is embodied in the Black goddess Sophia. And Sophia is Magdalena in human form. So Magdalena is the human embodiment of Sophia, and Yeshua is of the Christos. So I began to work deeply with the mythos of Inanna Ishtar, which I'd actually began working with back in my 20s when I was an addict in recovery. So there's an amazing book called The Descent of the Goddess, written many, many moons ago. And that really helped me in my recovery journey from addiction. And so I began to really weave the Venus cycle of her 7 waning moons, and then typically her 3 lunations in the underworld, and then her 7 waxing moons, with the mythos of Inanna Ishtar, where they descend 7 gates, and at each gate they're invited to release something that they are wearing or carrying that symbolizes an internalized shadow behavior or thought that might be blocking them from truly shining their soul's light in the world. So it's an unveiling as we descend. And then we arrive in the underworld and we meet with Ereshkigal girl, who is Inanna's sister, her twin sister, who symbolizes our shadow self. And we spend typically these 3 lunations there. And Inanna is hung naked on a meat hook. And so she has to face, her shadow self. But it's not what I try to teach my students and the women and men who work with me is that it doesn't need to be like a traumatic experience each time, because sometimes that can put you off. It's like, oh God, we're going down again. It's much more of an unveiling and a opportunity for empowerment and to rebirth ourselves, just like when Sophia returns to the pleroma and is united with Christ. So after this time in the underworld and the releasing of all that no longer serves us, we then ascend up those 7 waxing moon conjunctions, and ascend up the 7 gates, and we reclaim those things from the gatekeeper that we had surrendered. But this time, as we reclaim them, they are symbolizing our soul gifts, our dreams, our inspirations, everything that we want to bring forth into manifestation. And when I talk about manifestation, I think it's really important that we don't focus just on the kind of more animus, more masculine, sun god, solar manifestation, like from our solar plexus kind of energy. But it's also a manifestation of your soul gifts in the world that can be intensely personal. It can be a daily walk in nature connecting with source. It doesn't have to be a huge left brain goal setting achievement form of manifestation. But then when we arrive back up and we've gone through that 7th gate of ascent and we've reclaimed our crown and we've reconnected with source and our soul, we then have this incredible period, which I absolutely love, which is the Venus retrograde. And now some astrologers will see that as her going into the underworld, whereas I don't. I see that as her returning to the Garden of Eden, where she has a very Lilith experience in a way, because it's that 40 days in the wilderness where she comes back to herself, and she comes back to herself and to her wholeness through her own inner sacred marriage, which is then crystallized in that incredible conjunction between Venus and the solar god. So between our own inner king and queen. And then we have the rebirth and the resurrection through her rebirth as the morning star. And then we begin again on the 90-month journey. So for me, I just love this journey with an absolute passion. And because each lunar month is different astrologically, there are different influences. It means actually that every time you go on this journey, each month is different and is a different experience. So yeah, I just find it such an empowering way to live my life, really, is completely in tune, with the cycles of Venus, the moon, and especially Sirius as well.
Oh yeah, that is really powerful. And so like you can take that energy and really practice it in the more practical way. And like you said, like focusing on things that we release, but also things that we want to grow. And yeah, the whole serious part is also really beautiful. That has been, I think that has also become stronger in my consciousness the past years, but I maybe haven't tapped into as much as you have. So that would also be interesting to talk more about another time. And so how, if people want to work with you, you have this Rose Moon membership, right?
Yes, yes, I have a monthly Rose Moon membership where we
Mm.
follow the Venus cycle. And then I have my Rose Lineage program. So I have my Avalon Rose Priestess training and practitioner training, and then pilgrimages to Glastonbury, Avalon, and to southern Italy, to the land of the Black Madonna. So yeah.
That is so beautiful. And how can people find you?
So they can Google my name, Annabel de Boulay, and then they'll my website will come up. So annabeldeboulay.com, or come and follow me on Instagram.
Yeah, I'll share those links with everyone in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much. There's so much more want to ask you, but I won't keep you too long. And I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk. And thank you so much for sharing your
Thank
wisdom
you
and journey
so
with
much.
us.
Thank you so much, love. It's been such an honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.